Welcome everyone to the Astronomical Society of Edinburgh. We've got a bit of an echo, Peter. My name is Mark Phillips, I'm the president, and this is quite an exciting evening for us since it's the first meeting back for about 18 months, I suppose, in person. So it's going to be little testy maybe tonight. We're not quite sure what's going to be going on, but we think we've got all the technology working. I don't know who I'm speaking to. I'm looking at the people in the hall here, but I know there's a lot of people looking at me on Zoom and on YouTube as well, so it's a bit tricky to know what to do. Anyway, let's move on. This is what's happening tonight. We'll have a few slides, just introductory slides here, and then we're going to get into the meat of the meeting with Dr. Mike Shaw, who's in the USA, telling us about night photography. So we're all looking forward to that. And after that, I'll do a presentation on the sky in October. Just a little bit of intro. This is our first hybrid meeting, so we have people in the hall here in Edinburgh, and we're using technology for the first time. So please be patient with us as we get through some of the gremlins. And it's our first physical meeting since March 2020. And we have a remote speaker in the USA. We're streaming it to our ASE members on Zoom and also to our international audience on YouTube, which I think is quite large tonight. I want to say a huge thank you to the Augustine Church here, who have put together all the technology for us, and especially to one of our members, Graham Rule, who works here and has done a lot of work putting that together for us. And also thank you to Peter over there on the tech desk, who's pulling the strings and fighting with all the things that are going on. But it's going to work. We're confident of that. No, you're not. That's right. That's one of the first things. So give us a moment, please. Hopefully you now have the presentation as well as a picture of me in the corner. Yes, you do. That's good. So normally from this month onwards, we're going to have a meeting in the hall on the first Friday of each month with a physical speaker, someone with legs, not just a head, hopefully. And we will stream that always on Zoom and YouTube. And the middle Friday of the month, there's no middle Friday, obviously, but round about the middle of the month, we'll also have a virtual talk, which we'll also put on Zoom and YouTube. And for ASE members only, the Wednesday after the first meeting of the month, we have our imaging and observing group, which is a very, very active group. If you want to join us and learn all about imaging and observing, then that's the place to do it. We have a couple of new members, Bill Bonner and Mark St. Clair. So if we can all welcome them as we normally do.
Members.
We don't have any of them in the hall, I don't think, but they may be on Zoom. I have no idea, but we can find that out. And our membership is now 149. It's grown very rapidly over the last year and a half, actually. Very cheap to join if you want to join us. £30 for full or 15 for concessions. And just a reminder to our current members, renewals are due today, unless you joined on or after the 1st of April this year. And if you want to stay in touch with us, there are lots of ways of doing that through the website, Facebook, Twitter, and all the videos of all our meetings, past and future, will be on our YouTube channel as well. There's quite some interesting stuff there. So these are the talks that are coming up. We have our first imaging and observing group on Wednesday next week for members only. On the 15th of October, asteroids, how love, fear, and greed will determine our future in space. I think there's some stuff about asteroid mining there from Martin Elvis. On the 5th of November, we'll have a speaker here in Edinburgh, Justin Campbell-White from Dundee University, an accretion and inner disk of pre-main sequence stars. That's a sort of an add-on to some of our previous HOIS talks. It's a different view on star formation. The 19th of November, we have Mr. Comet himself, David H. Levy, who's going to be telling us remotely in the USA, basically his autobiography about his life in astronomy, a lot of the other things that he's done as an astronomer. On the 3rd of December, Will Joy, one of our members here, will be telling us about finding space rocks. Will is a meteorite nut, as you'll know if you ever met him, and he'll tell us all about the meteorites he's found and how to go about finding them yourself. And finally, for the year on the 17th of December, we'll have a talk about the telescope maker Thomas Cook from Martin Lunn, and that's particularly relevant to us since we have a strong association with Calton Hill, where they have a 6-inch Thomas Cook telescope. So that's it for the intros. So now it's time to go over to the USA to Mike Shaw. So Mike, over to you. We'll pull some strings here if you can start sharing your screen as well.
Very good, Mark, and thanks so much for the introduction. I'll go ahead and do just that. And again, I just wanted to say welcome everybody to this evening's presentation. It's a great honor to be with you this evening. So thanks to Mark and Andy and everyone else involved. My name's Mike Shaw. Please just call me Mike. And as you heard, I'm based in the USA, in Minnesota. And I saw in one of the chat comments that there's a little bit of a delay between the audio and the video. So I'll do my best to not speak too quickly and not move my mouse too quickly to keep on track of that. But really the goal of this evening is to talk a little bit about night photography and how you can really just get started with most likely the cameras that you have and the tripods that you have. So with that, I'll go ahead and switch over here. So to me, one of the great beauties of night photography is its ability to connect us with the stars. And, you know, we all have an astronomy, clearly an astronomy background, but this is a photograph of a starry night over a lighthouse here in Minnesota. And one of the things that I've always wanted to be able to do is just to switch on our rocket engines and blast off into space. So let's do that together. 3, 2, 1, off we go. And what you can see here is as the ground recedes into the distance, the starry night is revealed. You saw a comet or a satellite go by just there. And there's just, as astronomers, we're just so fascinated by what's in the night sky. And I just love the ability to use this art form to forge a connection with the night sky. Here's another example of a much easier object for you to photograph, the full moon. Here it is setting behind the state capitol building here in Minnesota. This is right before the lockdown in March of 2020. You can see the flags waving in the wind. You can see some birds flying by. There's always great excitement when this happens because the question is whether or not the alignment is there. But one of the things I'll be talking about this evening is how you can, yourself learn how to, align the moon and the sun and other objects as you see fit. Another great version of the moon is, of course, the crescent moon. You can see this is a very young crescent moon. I think this was the day 1 of the cycle. You can also see the Earth shine on the shadowed portion of the moon. That's this region over here where the part of the moon that's in shadow is picking up the reflected sunlight from the Earth. And it's just such a beautiful sight to see. This is over some houses along the shore of one of the lakes in Minnesota. Many other things beyond the the moon and the stars. These are a classic star trail image. And what's so remarkable about this image for a lot of people who are seeing this for the first time is how blue the sky is and how much color there is in the landscape. And of course, this is done under a nearly full moon. And the bright moonlight really just reveals the colors of the foreground just as it were daylight. But of course, our vision system is unable to pick this up because of our black and white vision at night. Here we are looking due north. You can see Polaris just to the right of the center of the star trails. And these are super easy and a fun project to undertake with your night photography journey. And that's, again, these are the types of things I want to help you get started with this evening. Now, of course, we're looking at essentially due north, just a little bit east of north here. So you can see all the stars rotating counterclockwise around the north celestial pole. But if we turn around and face in the opposite direction, we see a similar set of circles, except in the southern celestial pole is, for us in the northern hemisphere, is below the horizon. So here you can see the star trails making a beautiful arch over this island in Lake Superior. Now, star trails are an example of night photography or night photographs that are created by assembling stacks or multiple sequential images into a single image. And there's lots of things you can do with this. Another great example is a meteor shower. You know, this is the Perseid meteor shower from 2018, and you can see here these are this composite image shows all of the meteors seeming to originate from the radiant, which is in the constellation Perseus, in between the double cluster there and the top of Perseus. And the beautiful thing about this is you can really get a sense of how the Earth is passing through, even though it's kind of an artifact, but you can get a sense of how the Earth is passing through the dust trail left behind by the progenitor comet. So again, meteor showers, meteors are just one of a number of things that you can enjoy within the scope of night photography. A lot of times people think of the Milky Way, and that sort of stops there. And as I hope to illustrate this evening, there's so many other things to enjoy beyond the Milky Way. Now, of course, one of the great treats is the aurora borealis. You are able to see this. You're fortunate enough to live at a high enough latitude. All you need to do is have a magic cloud clearing wand to wave away the clouds, and you'll be able to enjoy the aurora just like we do here in Minnesota. This was taken just south of the Canadian border. This is a very normal time lapse that happens several times a year. I actually spent this couple nights this last weekend in a fruitless hunt for an aurora display that never actually happened. But that's pretty much how it goes. You have to be out there with your camera, giving it a shot. And honestly, I mean, I think that for all of us, that's one of the great joys of astronomy and enjoying nature in general, is that it's always a wonderful thing when we come home with a time lapse or a wonderful set of images. But actually, the experience of being out under a night sky is really reward enough by itself. And I know that you know what I'm talking about. Now, basic constellations are a great place to start. This is the right time of year to capture Orion, as I've shown here, just above the eastern horizon. Kind of a funny story with this image. This was as you can appreciate, a rather carefully planned event. We have Orion. It's perfectly positioned within the opening of this rock arch. It's not too big. It's not too small. I have the crescent moon setting on the western horizon behind me. I have really just a few minutes to capture this image before the crescent moon sets and the rock just becomes a silhouette. And then this couple show up and say, "Hey, would you take our photograph under the arch?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, except I'm kind of in the middle of a project here." But so I was pretty grumpy and unfriendly. And finally, I realized, well, I'm being a little bit rude. So let's have them go over and stand into the arch, and I'll just get this over with. And I realized, oh my gosh, that's the shot right there. Why haven't I had these people do this before that? So I kind of really learned a lesson about self-centeredness and karma, I suppose. So I've tried to remember that ever since I've been approached at night under the stars. But here's a familiar sight. Here's the Plough, or the Big Dipper, as we say here in the US, which is an asterism part of the constellation Ursa Major. I think you can make out the outline of the constellation, the nose of the Great Bear, and the front legs and the back legs back here. This was last summer, in the summer of 2020, in July, when we had Comet Neowise coming through. It was just a glorious sight to see. And, there's just, it's just one of a number of things that we're able to see every time we go out under the night sky. Here's another example of something that I always find a great deal of satisfaction in imaging, is the planet Mercury, which is visible right at the tip of my cursor, just there, the mouse, the arrow. It's a very small little dot. Maybe you can see the reflection of Mercury in the water right just there to the left of the arrow, the mouse. And we also have the planet Venus. And it's just incredible. I mean, Mercury and Venus, these are two of the planets of the solar system, but look at how small they are. I mean, it's always incredible to, when you think of the solar system, you always think of those I always think of these compressed models where everything is fairly large, but it's just incredible to appreciate how vast and tiny these planets are, these little specks of rock and gas and ice rotating around the sun in the farthest reaches of the solar system. And again, this is how night photography helps bring all this together. It puts a perspective between the land and the sky. It's like a bridge that really is just so beautiful and fantastic to enjoy. This was again from last summer. I'm sure many of you experienced this at some point, where you saw All 8 of the 9, or sorry, 7 of the 8 planets hold over from Pluto. The only one that's not visible is Mercury. It's below the horizon, and I was early in the morning, and I was just getting too sleepy. I wish I'd stayed up just a little bit longer. But you have the other 7 planets in the solar system, including Earth, the Pleiades, and just being under the stars and seeing how all the planets line up to reveal the planarity of the solar system is just a striking observation. It really, it's not a coincidence. When you see that phenomenon, as a scientist, you know that it means something, and you want to know what is it that means. Time lapses are a great way to put your night photography into motion. This is a time lapse. There's a little bit of an aurora borealis display just there that flickered through. And this was, of course, Comet Neowise last summer. And just being able to, there was a thunderstorm on the horizon just there. And there's so many events that are revealed through time-lapse photography at night because the time is sped up so much that you can actually discern the motion that normally isn't visible during a single event or even in a real-time video. If you look carefully here, you could actually see the comet, this is Comet Neowise again, moving against the backdrop of stars. It's fascinating because it's moving vertically from bottom to the top, even though the comet trails are off to the side. So I know this isn't a night photography or a nightscape image, but I just couldn't resist. Now, going back to the moon, lunar eclipses are another wonderful phenomenon to experience. We've got a couple coming up over the next several years, and always worth finding those and getting those onto the calendar. This is a composite sequence that shows the moon actually slipping into the Earth's shadow. And so by putting together a series of night photography images like this, you can actually visualize the shadow of the Earth as it passes through space, and as a full moon passes through it. And if you've ever experienced a total lunar eclipse, you know what an eerie phenomenon it is as you go from a full moon lit night to essentially a completely dark night. This was last May in Death Valley, California. This was a total lunar eclipse. And what was remarkable to me about this is that bright object right here, of course, is the eclipsed moon. But look, here's Antares. You can see this, the Milky Way, the Lagoon Nebula, all this detail that normally is completely obscured by the full moon. And it's just one of those incredible moments in time where you're, again, in awe of the celestial alignment. And, one of the latest frontiers in night photography, this is kind of a low resolution image, but is the field of deepscapes. And this is really where you can bring your knowledge of astronomy and photography into play to photograph, objects like the Lagoon Nebula here, the Rosette Nebula, the Orion Nebula now in the fall as it's coming up over the eastern horizon, and really just capture these incredible deep sky objects poised right above some landscape, a foreground item of interest. Now, of course, I'm sure you're familiar with light painting and all the different forms of light painting and light drawing. This is using a simple plastic tube with a light at one end, and I just swung it around in a circle behind this couple as part of an engagement portfolio. So light painting and light drawing is a fascinating way to create art involving the night sky when it's cloudy. And so if it's ever cloudy in Scotland, then this might be something to think about. Here's another example of the time lapse of the Milky Way. This is again back in Death Valley National Park at a different time of year when the moon was not full. You can see the galactic core regions of the Milky Way rising. This particular time lapse was created by mounting the camera on a tracking mount that was rotating to follow the motion of the Milky Way. So as the Milky Way passed, or as the Earth spun and the Milky Way appeared to move over the horizon, the camera followed it. Here we have Jupiter rising between some trees. And this is kind of an interesting one. I thought my camera had malfunctioned. I did an all-night time lapse, and I kept getting these green lines in my image, and they would appear, and then they would sort of move, and then they would appear. And it turned out that there was someone who was fishing with a glow-in-the-dark, luminous fishing lure. And it was like at midnight, they'd cast it out, it would hit the water, and then they would reel it in. And I never saw it disappear. So I don't know if they ever actually caught a fish, but anyway, it was just one of those things that I'm putting that under the category of haven't seen that before. Now, of course, these mostly been showing single images. This is a panorama of the early spring Milky Way. This was taken early in around 2 a.m. in the May morning. And you can see an incredible number of things revealed. You know, you've got the galactic core, you've got a couple of planets, you've got nebulae, star clusters, even got the Andromeda galaxy right over here. This actually is the crescent moon that's rising over the eastern horizon. It's not the sun. This is the crescent moon. It's a few days old, right? We're young or old, I would say. It's that same lighthouse double cluster. And there's a little bit of an aurora peeking out from behind the trees. So, you know, making panoramas is a wonderful way to experience the the night skies. This is an interesting one. I'm just throwing this in here as a point of fact. This is a tumbling satellite that's revealed over these a dark sky horizon in northern Minnesota. And what you can see here is that the satellite orbits the Earth. It's actually rotating, and it's solar, well, whatever's reflecting on it is, you know, reflecting, and then, you know, the reflection hits the Earth and then it spins around again. So it's kind of like an orbiting disco ball is how I like to think of it, as it spins through the heavens. Now, the last thing, then of course, there's the International Space Station, which is just a wonderful thing to see. Here it is rising over the horizon and disappearing overhead. Just an incredible thing to see. Now, before I go on to the details of how we can really capture the night skies, again, this is an early morning nightscape of the comet Neowise. And I've outlined a few of the constellations, and you can see Venus over here on the right-hand side. But you know who else was able to capture this exact same image were the astronauts on this International Space Station. You're saying, what? How's that possible? And it's incredible. I mean, they were using the same, you know, Nikon camera, more or less, the same lens, focal length, slightly different. I think they were using a 35 millimeter, and I was using a 24 millimeter lens. But, you know, the view from the space station is identical to the view from Earth. And it makes sense because, I mean, think about it. The astronauts are only, 255 miles closer to the stars than we are. And, you know, if you think about the billions and trillions of miles away that the stars and the other objects are, that's not really very, very much. I mean, we were about the same distance. So what that means is every single one of you listening in tonight on YouTube or in the hall this evening or wherever you are an astronaut. At night, when the clouds do clear and you can gaze into the night sky, you're seeing the same view as if you would see if you were on board the space station. There's no difference at all. And it's this realization that really connects us all to the night sky in a way that I think is just absolutely riveting. So I just wanted to make that point. Just a bit of blatant self-promotion. Here are a couple of my books on night photography. If you're interested in learning more, The Complete Guide to Landscape Astrophotography is my first one, and the second most recent one is called Creative Nightscapes and Time Lapses. So there that is. So here's a brief outline of what I thought I'd talk about this evening. As I just went through a bunch of examples of nightscapes, I really want to set the record straight regarding gear and camera and exposure settings that I think you'll find useful. I want to talk about the most important thing of all, which is getting a good focus. And this is also the hardest thing for beginning people to get right, because it is so frustrating and difficult without a little bit of guidance. I want to give you that guidance so you're off on the right track. And then if we have time, I'll talk about choosing a location, but we'll see how that goes. So a nightscape, really, coming back to our engagement image, is anything that captures an interesting night sky with an interesting foreground. And that's really about it. So, you know, let your imagination run wild. I mean, there's no council of elders on any of this stuff that judges or has any sort of an opinion that matters. Only your opinion is the only one that matters. So anything that you find interesting. I mean, if we all went into a restaurant, we'd all order something different, wouldn't we? And it's the same thing here. Some people are interested in the Milky Way. Other people are interested in planets, star trails. It's all over the map. So let's get into the gear and camera settings for night photography. This is all that you need. A camera body, a lens, a ball head, and a tripod. That's about it. I will talk about the two important things that a camera really has, but if you have a camera and a lens and a tripod, you have what you need. Virtually all modern cameras, DSLRs, digital single lens reflex cameras, or mirrorless cameras, and even cell phones are capable of capturing fantastic images of the night sky that make this bridge between that you can use as your newfound astronaut capability to bridge between the night sky and the Earth. This is a self-portrait with a third camera of me in the field, aiming my camera up to get that star trail image. And you can see like 2 cameras. There's nothing really sophisticated at all about it. There's no apparatus, there's no telescopes, there's no wires or cables or anything like that. It's just a camera on a tripod and you. Now, there are 2 things that you want to make sure your camera has: manual focus and manual exposure. They're different. The manual focus, I mean, basically what happens is your cameras, as good as they are from a sensor point of view, they are not able to focus at night. The apparatus inside the camera fails at night. There's not enough light. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. The manual exposure is also important because your light meter doesn't work, and the aperture mode, the shutter mode, all those modes just simply are inoperable at night. And so the way to go is like that. So let's go through the camera settings. Feel free to screenshot any of this stuff or use a cell phone to capture it. There's going to be a recording of this afterwards, so there's no need to take notes. The key places to start are with manual focus, manual exposure. Turn off your auto ISO if you have that. Set your white balance to anything except automatic white balance. Daylight is actually, believe it or not, a really good place to start. If you have long exposure noise reduction, turn that off. And always, from this point forward, I want you to always shoot using a raw file format. Yes, they take up more data, but that's because they're much higher quality images. So those are the basic camera settings. And now I want to talk about the golden exposure settings for night photography. And here they are: an ISO of 3200, an aperture as low as you can go, f4.0, f3.5, and a shutter speed of between 10 to 20 seconds. This is a good place to start. You can go higher with the ISO, 6400, 12,800, but something in this range is almost guaranteed to give you success in a dark location. If you use these settings and your images are too bright, that's good news. That means that you're in a bright, you have enough light to work with, and you can decrease the ISO or decrease the shutter speed. But this is a good combination of settings and a good place to start. So there you have it, the camera settings and the exposure settings. Let's talk briefly about lens choice, because a lot of times on a workshop, we get to the location, we pile out of the car, and everyone says, "Mike, what lens should I use?" And it's like, well, whatever lens is on your camera is going to work just fine. You can use a fisheye lens for huge all sky images. This is an Aurora Corona or Crown, an overhead display. It captures the whole thing. A wide angle lens is really what most people use for night photography, especially when they get started. This is a 14 to 24 wide angle lens. And then a mid-range zoom is also really good for photographing the constellations like Orion that you saw earlier, the 24 millimeters to 70 millimeters focal length. Fast lenses are really, really worth it with night photography. I mean, this is a 50 millimeter f1.2 manual lens. Everything's got a funny story, but this one, I flew to Tucson, Arizona to take place in an astrophotography workshop at Kitt Peak. And as I was landing, the person from Kitt Peak who was organizing it called me in my rental cars. I was driving on the freeway and said, "Mike, we've canceled the workshop because it's raining." I was like, well, that would have been good to know about 3 hours ago before I got into my plane in Los Angeles. But anyway, so here I was in Tucson, Arizona. So I went to a pawn shop along the way and found this lens, and I've used it. It's been a great lens. So, visit your local pawn shop. So you never know what you're going to find. And then, of course, telephoto lenses are great for, deep sky objects. They're almost like miniature telescopes, honestly. And to get a sense of what all these numbers really mean, this isn't just an example of how it works. When you have a wide angle lens, you're capturing a lot of the sky. It's a wide angle. That's why they're called wide angle lenses. And a telephoto lens is like a telescope. It's like a little narrow slice of the sky. You can really zoom in on something. So if your compositional vision has a huge swath of the sky, then you want to reach for your wide angle lens. But if you want to have a star field or some particular object, then you want to go to a slightly longer focal length, something like that. Now, a quick word about shutter speed, because I mentioned 10 to 20 seconds, and you might say to yourself, well, where did that come from? Because ISO, you can go as basically as high as you can. Aperture, you go as low as you can. Shutter speed, you can be anywhere you want. So how did I pick those numbers? And, I'm a former college university physics professor, and I'm sure many of you have a similar sort of science engineering background. So please put that over there, because this little equation is going to irk you because of the units. Anyway, so what this tells us is, this is called the rule of 300. It's a photography rule. So just, second law of Newton's laws of motion's out the window. This tells us that the maximum shutter speed in seconds, okay, so the units on the left are seconds, are the number 300 divided by the focal length in millimeters. And it works pretty well. So what does that mean? Well, that tells us that if we have a 50 millimeter lens, the maximum shutter speed, or in seconds that I could use before I start to see star motion, is right around 6 seconds. And in fact, if you go through this for all the different lens focal lengths you might use 14 millimeters up to around 70 millimeters, you can see that the maximum shutter speed that you can use before you get star trailing really drops, which makes sense because you're looking at a narrower portion of the sky. So anyway, just keep this in mind when you're going to, you're setting up to use your night photography images. But like I say, if you have a wide angle lens, 10 to 20 seconds is usually pretty good. So that's just a good place to start. Just let's review a couple of the images that you saw earlier. This one was shot with a wide angle lens, 14 millimeters. This was made with an ISO of 8,000, f-stop of f3.5, an aperture of f3.5 with a 20-second exposure. This one, on the other hand, look at how short of an exposure time this was, a 300th of a second. And that's because full moon shots above the horizon are often done right after sunset, when there's lots of light in the sky. So that's something to think about. Here's that image of the plow, 24 millimeter lens, perfect for Ursa Major, absolutely perfect field of view. ISO of 5,000. Okay, it's a little higher than 3,200. Aperture of f4.5. Again, 20 seconds. And the star trail image, this was assembled from a series of 5-second shots, each of which was made at 3,200 with an aperture of f3.5. Each at 5 seconds. I was hoping to capture an aurora under the full moon, and neither the aurora came about. But anyway, beautiful star trail image. So, all right. So here's the essential item in addition to the camera and the tripod that I mentioned that you must have, and that is a red headlight. This is absolutely critical for your safety and to preserve your night vision. This is a group of workshop participants about 5 years ago at this point. And here's a bunch of things that are kind of nice to have. I want to go through these briefly because I know we're all sort of gear hounds and love to, the holiday season's coming up. One of the things I have all of them here if anyone has a specific question. This is called a focusing loop, and it's basically like a magnifying glass for your camera. Really good for focusing. I'm going to say a few more words about this later. A remote shutter release is really quite important to keep your hands off the camera when you're creating your exposure. So you can get a manual release, which is basically just a button, or you can get a little computer that is attached to a cable that you can use to control your camera. Now, let me now share with you one of the night photographer's secret weapons. Are you ready for this? This one, when I first learned about this, blew me away. This is the Tiffin Double Fog 3 filter. Absolutely incredible. It's what it does. It's essentially a diffuser that takes the point sources of light that are the stars and spreads out that light over a much greater area over the camera sensor. And what that does is it allows the camera sensor to detect the different colors of the stars. And you can see that as you can see the teapot asterism in the Milky Way in this comparison. I never leave my car without my compass. It's just something that I just habitually carry. I'm just throwing that in there. And then, depending on where your interests lie, you may be interested in a portable star tracker. So that's something that we could talk about. This is basically, it's a portable equatorial mount that's operated by batteries, and it allows you to extend your shutter speed. And then last tip I thought I'd share is it's always a good idea to stabilize your tripod by hanging a weight from the bottom of the center post. Usually there's like a little hook in there that you can hang something from. And this, stabilizes thing, it adds mass, and it also helps prevent it from tipping over. All right, now focusing. Let's talk about focusing. A friend of mine went to Australia and rented a car. And when she was checking out the I'm going to try to do an Australian accent. I mean it in a constructive way. The guy looked her in the eye and said, I want you to remember one thing, Amy. And she goes, what's that? He goes, Diesel, Diesel, Diesel. And she goes, what? And he goes, Diesel, Diesel, Diesel. And she goes, I don't understand. It says, repeat after me, Diesel. So the point was he wanted to make sure that she put diesel into the car and not petrol, gas. And so I'm looking you in the eye and I'm going to say in my American accent, focus, focus, focus. And I'll say it again. I'm sorry to be like this, but focus, focus. It's so important to get a good focus. So please, every time you go out at night, look out for yourself and get a good focus. You will never be disappointed by the effort that you have. So I'll just leave it at that. This is what a focus star looks like. It's a little white dot. It's on the right. That one looks a little elongated because stars flicker. An unfocused star looks like the one on the left. It's a little disc, a little open disc. The focusing loop, the best way to get this in focus, you won't be able to see the stars through the viewfinder, so you absolutely must use the display on the back of your camera to view the stars. I mean, right now, if you're going to do this, we're doing a workshop over the weekend or on Wednesday night, and Jupiter is very prominent right now in this southeast, along with Saturn, very bright stars. Arcturus is very good right now. We're going to have Sirius coming up fairly soon. So any one of these really bright objects makes a really good focusing target. And my advice to you is to urge you to learn how to focus directly on these objects. And with a little bit of practice, it does take some practice, so don't be discouraged. You can send me an email anytime, mike@mikeshawphotography.com, and say, Mike, I need help. What do you recommend? And I can help you out. But do try to master this technique, because this will give you the absolutely best images that you can capture. Now, a plan B, if you are not able to do that, especially at the beginning, or if you're starting out during the day, you're doing a time lapse, is you can actually use your camera's autofocus to focus on the horizon, in the early evening, and then tape your focus ring, like I've shown you here with a piece of tape, and then switch your camera to manual focus. So that's a great way to go. So that's sort of a plan B, and it works pretty well. And even if you focus your camera using the focusing loop, it's not a terrible idea to put some tape over the camera. Now, the last thing I really want to talk about before we turn things over to questions, so I suspect there might be a few, is composing in the dark. And believe me, I have plenty of other stuff to talk about. So I don't want to just go on, and I want to make sure we have a chance to dialogue a little bit. So this is what the camera photographs when you, this is the constellation Orion. Here's Sirius. It's next to, Balanced Rock in Arches National Park in Utah in the US. And when I look through the viewfinder, I don't see any of those stars. I mean, I'm looking through a tiny little window that's about a centimeter in size. And I might be able to see Sirius if I squint, but I generally can't see anything. And so the challenge is, well, how do you get a composition if you can't see anything? And what I can see, however, is I can see this rough profile of the horizon. So my approach, and I'm going to offer it to you in case it's helpful, is I want to make sure I want to have, Bellatrix here in the composition. I want to make sure that star and the top of Orion, at least this part of Orion, is in the composition. I don't want to clip that out of the composition. So what I do is I say to myself, Mike, that's about how far that star is above Balanced Rock. And that's about the width of Orion. Those are about the same distances. And wouldn't you know it, that's also about the same height as Balanced Rock itself. So what I try to do is I try to gauge my composition to match up. If you see on the right, I try to leave, I'm trying to circle this with my cursor. I hope you can see that. I try to put about this much space above, essentially the same height of the rock above it to make sure that star is in the composition. Now, clearly, this is a specific example of a composition that not every rock, not every time you photograph it, right, you'll have this particular rock underneath it. But the point being that there will be something along you should be able to see the horizon if you turn your camera off, by the way, when you're doing your composing. I always switch my camera off. I can look through the viewfinder, so there's no lights in the viewfinder. I look through the viewfinder, I can say, okay, I can see there's like a big tree right there, and there's another big tree, and there's like a dip in the tree line over there. There's a mountain or something, and those form like an equilateral triangle with this thing. So I want to make sure that thing is about there, and then I kind of iterate. And there's a huge process of iteration involved in this. All right, last thing of the very last thing I want to talk about is things that can go wrong, because photographing at night is also it's a pretty difficult thing to do, and it's hard to get a good focus. Weather can throw you a curveball. You can get a little sleepy. It's cold. Lights from other people can be kind of irritating, and there's a lot of pressure from from social media and all this other stuff, and your family's like, well, how did it go last night? It was like, well, not so well. My lens frosted over. There's all these things that can go wrong, and just enjoy the experience. But here's the thing, especially if you go out at night by yourself the first few times, it can be a little bit unsettling. And in all seriousness, if and when that feeling of unsettledness comes upon you, just let it go. I mean, leave if you're not comfortable, but I find that, I always have this sense of the world kind of closing in on me when I'm first going out at night. But then after my night vision adapts and I can see in the dark, I have this wonderful feeling of expansion. And I'm like this, I've entered this whole new world. It's mine to enjoy. And it's a beautiful thing. Last thing for sure is I want to go through the best practices. When you're near other people, I think they and we all appreciate no using of a cell phone screen with white flashlights or any other. This is like, you're astronomers, you understand all of this. Really only use your red headlamps and aim them away from where the other cameras are pointing, just so your red light doesn't spill out into the screen. Dim the LCD screens on your cameras, tape over any little indicator lights on your camera so they don't show up in other people's shots. And park your vehicle so it's aiming away, and you set your vehicle's headlights to turn off. And you can see these lightning bugs here. Once you get comfortable experiencing the night sky and you're outside, fighting the weather, there's this whole world just waiting for you to explore. I mean, there's an endless source of wonder and excitement, mystery, curiosity. It just never, ever gets old. I mean, as astronomers, what it's like to search for objects in the night skies. And, I just wanted to share that just a few of these tips to get you started on the right foot. I'm happy to take some questions in the time available to us. I didn't want to go on for too long. And if we haven't connected yet on social media, please, I'd love to have that connection. This is my Instagram, it's Mike Shaw Photography, and then on Twitter, it's Mike Shaw Photo. So with that, I will stop and turn things back over to the crowd. See if I can find the stop sharing. Where's it? There it is. Oh, there we go. All right, so with that, I'm going to stop and turn things back over to you. And then if we don't have any questions, I have plenty of things to talk about. So that's a fair warning.
Well, thank you for that, Mike. I mean, that answered a lot of the questions that I had when I first started doing nightscape photography. So that was fantastic. Before we move on to questions, can I ask members to unmute wherever they happen to be and thank Mike for his talk?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Well, we have three levels of questions. I think we'll ask questions in the hall first of all. Has anyone got any questions here before we move on to the Zoom questions?
Don't be shy.
Well, they may come out as we move on. Let's go on to the Zoom questions first of all. Neil, are you there to read out any that might be asked?
Yes, I am. There's a question from Byron, who says, hello from Bucharest. Any hints on the processing process?
Oh, terrific question, Byron. Thanks for asking about the processing. That's certainly something that we didn't talk about at all. And yes, the point that I would like to make is that the images that come off your camera are, in almost every case with a night photography image, going to need some level of post-processing. And to me, probably the most important thing to get right as best you can is the color balancing. It's a little bit tricky to do, but once you master it, the results will speak for themselves. What does the proper color balancing look like? Well, Milky Way is not being purple or green or blue or pink. But again, it's an art form, so it's entirely up to you. But I think that most people would look for a Milky Way that has like a cream colored sort of star field region. Using the eyedropper tool in Lightroom or the Adobe Camera Raw tool in Photoshop to click on a non-Milky Way part of the empty night sky is a good way to get a good color balance, or using a daytime color balancing approach is a good place to start. But certainly color balancing is important. In terms of moving on from there, I mean, simply, I use Lightroom or Photoshop to do my post-processing. I've been using them for a long time, and I find they work really well. And so my general workflow, since you asked, is to do what I call global adjustments first. And by global, I mean they affect the entire image, like a color balance, or maybe I'll bring up the whites and the light highlights, or bring down the darks, and then move on to local adjustments. So like I'll remove a satellite, or I'll brighten up this region a little bit, or darken down this region a little bit, or remove this, my friend who shined his light in his car at the wrong time, things like that. So color balance, global adjustments, local adjustments, and going from there. But great question though. So yes, that's how I would start. So if you'd like me to elaborate, I can certainly do so.
Thank you, Mike. The next question's from Ian, and he says, how do you do blue sky and stars?
Yes. Isn't that a curious thing? The secret is to do that under a full moon. Now, what has happening there? So why is the sky blue in the first place? Well, it's oxygen and nitrogen molecules. They're a diatomic molecule. They Rayleigh scatter blue light when they're excited by sunlight. And that happens when the moon light hits it. I mean, the moonlight is reflected sunlight. So the sunlight hits the moon, reflects its Earth's atmosphere, causes it to glow. During a total solar eclipse, a lot of that light is blocked as the moon blocks the sun. You can see the stars, and the Earth becomes less blue. But so the quick answer is that during a phase of the moon or time when the moon is below the horizon at night, there's no sunlight exciting the Earth's atmosphere. So the Earth's atmosphere is transparent. You can see the night sky, it's clear. But during the part of the cycle when the moon is above the horizon at night, that's when you get the blue sky. And what's surprising perhaps is two things: that you can see stars even then through that blue sky. And secondly, that you can see the colors, the camera picks up the colors. And that's one of the most remarkable things that you'll find exciting about your forays into night photography, is how much of the colors of the landscape and the sky you'll see, especially if you use a diffuser. If you have some high clouds, you'll be able to see the colors of the stars, the yellows and reds of the gas giants and the blues of the young hot stars. I mean, it's just a fascinating thing to be able to appreciate the color variety in the night sky. Great question.
Thank you again. The next question is from John Morell, and he asks, do you use a full frame or APS-C sensors?
Both. Yeah, both. I mean, they both work fine. A full frame maybe have a slight edge over, resolution and low noise capability, but if you have an APS-C sensor, you can use your cell phone now. It's just incredible. So the quality of the processing and the sensors themselves, the pixels, is such that it really makes no difference. What is an APS-C sensor for those maybe just hearing it for the first time? So a full frame, quote unquote, sensor, the actual chip that is the sensor in your camera is the same size as a 35 millimeter slide negative, same size. And an APS-C sensor is just smaller. And so because it's smaller, it has maybe less resolution than a full frame sensor, but there's not a huge difference, honestly, and especially when you're getting started. So, if you have a camera with a kit 18 to 55 millimeter lens and a tripod, you are good to go tonight to start getting night photography images for sure.
Okay, the next question is from David Craig, and he asks, were the images stacked?
Very good question. None of the images that I showed you here tonight were stacked. I'm an impatient fellow, and the stacking is an advantageous process. I probably should do it more, but so the stacking process involves taking multiple sequential images, let's say maybe a dozen or a dozen roughly, just say 10 to 20, And then putting them into well, you're astronomers, so you know what stacking is. So then, it's basically putting them into a program which averages the pixel value of the night sky. It aligns the images and then averages the pixel value. And that averaging process essentially removes any noise. And the stacking software programs, for example, Starry Landscape Stacker for the Mac or Sequitur for the PC, manages to notice that the foreground is moving, between the different images, and so it sort of masks out the boundary between the moving foreground and the aligned sky and puts everything together beautifully. And so stacked images are much cleaner and more noise-free than single images. But the images that you saw tonight were all single images.
Okay, we have another question from John, who says, I note that some of your time-lapse images have quite a lot of satellites. Do you have any advice on removing them now that we have far more with Starlink, OneWeb, and other satellite providers are available?
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, yes and no. I mean, there's not much we can really do about that, is there? And so the low Earth orbit satellites, such as Starlink, the current generations, are most prominent during the twilight hours. In the middle of the night, they're in the Earth's shadow, so there are not quite as many of them. But you're right. There are so, I mean, I remember back in the day, it was quite a thing to be able to see a satellite at night. And now it's like, they're everywhere. So I have heard, I haven't tested this out, but I just was recently at a conference in May. And one of the presenters was talking about using Sequitur, which is Sequater. It's like the word equator, but with an S in front of it. And it's a noise removal software program for the PC. And he stated that there was a mechanism in Sequater when you're doing a time lapse that during the time lapse of the night sky, the program would actually compare on the fly each image with like the average, excuse me, of the 10 preceding images. So you're basically doing a stacking as you're doing the time lapse assembly. And in doing so, you completely remove the satellites because they're just not there. And I haven't tried this out, but that would be an absolute game changer if that were the case. He showed a couple of examples, and he is a very reliable source. I mean, I have no reason at all to doubt him. It's just I haven't personally experimented with that. But if you have any interest in doing that, I would urge you to pursue that. So,
okay, thanks again, Mike.
Got his thumb up.
The
Yeah, great.
last question from the Zoom audience is from Viv. Would you recommend using an Astro modified camera for the deepscapes? And if so, what kind of modification would be best?
Yes, well, this is a great question, Viv. And so, yes, it would certainly be worth the investment for nebulae, emission nebulae in particular, hydrogen emission nebulae. And it can be a profound improvement, over an unmodified camera. So there's really two main types of modification. There's sort of an astro modification and a full spectrum modification. And the astro modification is sort of what I have done. I've done it with one of my cameras. It's my astro modified camera. It's a Nikon. It works beautifully. And the reason I chose not to go with a full spectrum modification is that the full spectrum modification is basically it's an IR camera. So you cannot really use it at all during the day, except for the special lens filter. And the available lens filters only fit on not wide angle lenses. And there's still kind of a weird color cast that happens. The bottom line is if you do a full spectrum conversion, you basically are committing it, in my opinion, to a night, either an IR camera during the day and a night camera at night, but it's really good at night. An astro modification just removes a filter that allows the hydrogen emission lines to come through, and it can have a big effect. So there's an outfit in the US called Spencer's Camera that I would recommend. That's where I've gone. I've seen Clarence Spencer give talks. He seems very reliable. He's done work for NASA. His modified cameras have gone up on the space station. So I'm seeing something in the I'm gonna try to type something into chat because Tiffin, sorry, fog 3. So I'll come back to that in a sec. So yeah, so I bet there's maybe in the UK or in Europe or somewhere nearby, there's another astro modified camera supplier. But yes, I would recommend it if you are interested in that, because you will notice a big difference, especially in the nebulosities.
Okay, and thanks, Mike. You've responded to John's request, and that concludes the questions from the Zoom audience. So I'll hand things back to Mark in the church.
Have we got any questions in the hall? So we've got some questions here in the hall advert from YouTube. Yeah, just a couple from YouTube. Will, have you got time, Mike, for a couple more questions?
Oh, I'm here. I'm here for you, everyone. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep, we've had very good response from Zoom. And just to give you a little heads up, we've had people from Ethiopia to Sweden, Canada to down in South America, across to Australia, and all over the UK. So it's been a very wide audience and enjoyed by loads. Fantastic. Moving on to questions. We have Teddy Huang. Some people mention the 500 rule. What's your take on that compared to the 300 rule, which you mentioned?
Oh, Teddy, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. So yes, you're absolutely right. The 500 rule was the the starting point. And I'd be willing to bet that the camera that you have now is sort of superseded that. And so again, there's no real, I'm going to look at, so this is, I just happen to have a copy of my book somewhere. There's a figure in here. I don't think I'll be able to place my finger on it, but essentially what you can do, here's what I'd recommend you do, Teddy, to answer this question yourself, is to take your lens of choice, okay? Let's suppose it's keep the math simple, let's suppose it's a 50 millimeter lens. So you have your 50 millimeter lens on your camera and you aim it east, let's say at Orion, because that's where it's on the, on the celestial equator, that's where the stars are moving the fastest. And you photograph Orion, and you do that with the following shutter speeds. You take the number 500, you divide it by 50, so that's 10 seconds. You take the number 400, divide that by 50, and that gives you 8 seconds. You take the number 300, and you divide that by 50, that gives you 6 seconds. You go all the way down to 100, that gives you 2 seconds. So you've got, what do we say, 500? So from 10 seconds down to 2 seconds. So 10, 9, 8, or 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2. And then you just zoom in and you look at each one of those images, the stars in each one of those images. And at some point, you will see the stars are basically pinpoints with very small to little to no trailing. And at that point, that's the rule that you might want to use. The rule of 500 would give you a result that, the 10 seconds, that you'll definitely be able to see some star motion. But, my advice would be to try it out yourself. The short answer to your question is the 500 rule used to work for legacy cameras, but modern cameras are more sensitive than that. And that's why I recommend a 300 rule. If it's sensitive, I use a 100 rule. But give it a shot, see what you think. And then send me an email what you decide.
That's great there, Mike. Now we got a question from, let me see, Akif Zaman. His question is, when it comes to capturing time lapses, what's the maximum recommended time exposure? 30 seconds, 15 seconds, 1 minute, etc.
That's a great question. There's no limit. There is no limit. So the thing about time lapses is that the way a time lapse works is you take a series of sequential images and then you animate them fast enough to trick your vision system. So your vision system is capturing roughly 20 frames a second. That's how your retina works, and sends those 20 images off to your brain, and your brain interprets them and interprets that as being motion. So as long as your animation is faster than 20 frames a second, your brain's going to interpret that as motion. Now, each frame that you're animating, it can be as long as you want. I mean, it can literally be a day. It could be, there's no limit. For a night photography scenario, I think typically my approach is to set the shutter speed for each image that I'm going to be animating, so that image can be used as a still image on its own right. So for example, I was shooting a time lapse in New Mexico and as part of a workshop, and I was talking to one of my students. It was the middle of the night, and all of a sudden there was like a flash bulb that went off behind me, and I saw her. She goes, "Oh my gosh, did you see that?" And I'm like, "Well, no, I was talking to you." And it turns out there's this huge meteor that just went through the time lapse, and unfortunately my camera was pointing that direction. So that image, I can take that image and frame it and do things with that. So I use the Teddy's rule of 300 or 500 or whatever we decide, and I use that to set the shutter speed, and then I just collect a sequence of images over some period of time to give me a long enough clip that I can use. So in a nutshell, that's the quick answer. Great question, though.
And just a final question: how about using a polarizer? Is there any benefit for a polarizer or not?
Great question. Well, there is during the day when not really at night, honestly. I mean, I've included the use of a polarizer in my book, but I haven't experimented with polarized moonlight. That would be the only real time then you'd use a polarizer. So what the polarizer does is the sunlight that comes through the Earth's atmosphere at different angular positions relative to where the sun is becomes polarized slightly, and you can use a polarizer to cut that out. There is one notable example, though. And if you are fortunate enough to find yourself in a situation where you can photograph a lunar rainbow or a moon bow, or under a full moon, a waterfall, a rainbow in a waterfall spray, if that makes any sense, from moonlight. So it's a moon bow and a waterfall spray at night, or a lunar rainbow, which is called a moon bow. A polarizer will have an effect to intensify the colors of that moon bow. I'll just leave it at that. So that would be the one time I would consider using a polarizer at night. But the downside is that polarizers tend to block a lot of light. So it's kind of a trade-off there.
Excellent. That question was from George. And now
and we have one last question in the hall, and then I think we'll finish it there. Here's Nigel, who's here in the hall with us.
Thanks very much, Mike. That was a superb presentation. I just wanted to ask of what the advantages there are to mirrorless cameras over traditional DSLRs for nightscape photography.
That's a great question. The biggest advantage I would say is your ability to do the composing at night. The mirrorless camera has an electronic viewfinder, and the ones that I've used in the past allow you to have enough sensitivity that you can actually formulate a reasonably good composition. You can actually see the stars at night, and you can potentially focus on them, but certainly do a much better job composing. In terms of the sensor performance, I think at this point the jury is such that I'm open to a negotiation on this, but the jury is such that the sensors in the DSLR cameras still have a slight edge over the mirrorless cameras. So if you're looking at just raw performance, I think the state-of-the-art DSLRs still have a slight edge over the mirrorless cameras, but that's going to change at some point. The only other exception to that point is that one of the Sony Alpha 3 cameras is able to capture real-time video of the Aurora Borealis. And that's not possible, to my knowledge, with really almost any other camera. There's a Sigma camera that I just saw referenced that is able to, the person I know, I'm insanely jealous of this, but was able to capture some real-time video of the Aurora Borealis. But beyond that, I actually purchased a mirrorless camera, and then I returned it 6 months later because its low light performance wasn't up to what I needed from a camera. So but we're on that point where the curves are going to cross pretty soon.
If we can all thank Mike again. That's probably set us all thinking with lots more questions now as well. Mike's website's a really good place to look for these things as well. So I'll put that on our website afterwards, and you can follow up some of the links there as well. But thank you for that, Mike. And I think Mike's got to leave us now, but that was a fantastic talk, so thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to, this works, it does. Sorry, okay, that's right. Okay, better, yeah, better. Okay, we're now going to move on to the sky in October. Do you want to put the pick like it? That's great. Hopefully you can see that on Zoom and YouTube now. That's fine, Peter. That's what's going out. Is it wouldn't be up there yet? Okay, just getting it right. This is my version of it. Just so you know, every month Alan Pickup. Very interesting. If you can all mute on Zoom, please.
Mark, we're not seeing.
Okay, sorry. Let me know when you can see it.
That's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's all good, is it? Right. Okay, we'll carry on then. So I was about to say, every month on our website, Alan Pickup, who's the real pro at doing this, comes up with a very comprehensive sky diary every month. And Alan does this talk every other month as well. So Alan will be doing it next month. But you can find that on our website at the start of every month. So this is the sky from Edinburgh, looking south. I've created the chart for the middle of the month, 15th of October, about 9 o'clock. It's British summertime. That's about 8 o'clock. That's exactly 8 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time. And in the middle of the month, nautical twilight starts about 7:30, and astronomical twilight starts at 8:20. So it is getting darker earlier, and there's lots of opportunities to do astronomy now. Now we'll pick out our usual pointers. There's the summer triangle, which is still high up in the south. Vega, Deneb, and Altair, and Cygnus, Lyra, and Aquila. Was a good one to find. The keystone of Hercules starting to move further west now, with its great globular cluster nearby. The square of Pegasus is starting to get higher as well, and that's going to become more prominent over the next month or so. Down in the south, still pretty low down, we have Jupiter and Saturn, two bright planets, which are still worth looking at. The rich portions of the southern Milky Way are starting to move away now, but the rest of the Milky Way is still very high overhead, so there's still lots of rich star fields to look at up there. And over in the east, the Pleiades are rising. I always think that's the herald of winter. When you see that rising in the evening, then you know winter's on its way. So while we're in this part of the sky, let's focus a little bit on Cygnus. I'm really showing this just because some of our members have taken some fabulous images of objects in Cygnus recently. So there's the Eastern Veil Nebula by Pat Devine, which is an absolutely beautiful image, part of a supernova remnant. Ian Smith has taken this picture of the Crescent Nebula. And Greg Loudon's taken this fabulous picture of the North American Nebula. One thing you'll notice is all of these images are taken in narrowband. These are all emission nebulae, and it certainly picks up those details a lot better, and also helps with light pollution and moonlight as well, for example. And you can see more of members' images on our Flickr group. So let's have a look at the planets first of all. Venus is not really an object to look at this month. It is emerging into the evening sky, but it is so low down that it's really not observable. It's barely a degree above the horizon at times. So I think we'll probably rule Venus out for this month, certainly for telescopic observation. Saturn is still putting on a show in the south. It's pretty low at 14 degrees altitude, so it is still in the murk of the atmosphere, and it does affect our ability to image it. It's magnitude 0.5, and its disk is at 17 seconds of arc. You can take photographs of it. Radim Stano is our friend in Slovakia, and he's got an advantage of about 5 degrees on us, and takes some great pictures. He's been chasing the moons of Saturn as well, as you can see. But you can still take them from Edinburgh, even though it is low down, and that's one I took last week. Jupiter is slightly higher up at 18 degrees. Minus 2.6 is quite a bit brighter, and you can't really miss it in the southern sky, and a much bigger disk of 44 arc seconds. Again, these are pictures that have been taken by members. Radim capturing the 4 Galilean moons as well. Mike McGovern from Edinburgh took that one too. So even though it is relatively low down, you still can take good pictures and see it through the telescope as well, visually. Mercury is going to be making its best morning appearance of the year. By the end of the month, it rises over 100 minutes before the sun. It's about 6 degrees high in the east-southeast. There's a chart. So if you want to try and catch Mercury, which is always pretty elusive, then this is a good chance to do it. And it's always best to go hunting for it before the sun rises, so there's no danger of you damaging your eyesight with the sun. And of course, today, ESA's Bepi Colombo has arrived on its first pass of Mercury. It's not going into orbit yet. It is its first flyby. It's going to do another 5 flybys before it finally goes into orbit in January 2025 and starts its mission. The moon this month, new moon on the 6th of October and full moon on the 20th. So new moon's obviously a good time to do your deep sky object observing and imaging. Full moon, it usually blots out a lot of the fainter objects, unless you're imaging in narrowband, as I said before. We have our own Lunar 100 project that we're running on our website. These are the 100 most interesting features on the moon. And we've been filling those up over the last year. Members have been submitting the images, and that's where you can see them on our website. And the moon is full of interest. I mean, not a huge amount probably changes, although there's more changing than we realize. But with the shadows and the different lighting angles, it seems to change every single day. So it's a really good object to look at. While we're on the moon, a few of us have been chasing a transit of the space station, International Space Station, across the moon. I'll just run this video that Will Joy managed to capture. Don't blink or you might miss it, but to the bottom part of the moon, you'll see the space station passing over. And there it goes. And this is an image that I managed to capture and turn into a GIF as well, slightly closer in. And it really does look like a TIE fighter from Star Wars rather than a space station, I think. But someone said there's no X-Wing chasing it, so it probably isn't. Meteor showers this month, nothing really great at all. There's a couple of showers with a handful of meteors you might see. But the Draconids might be worth looking at for the real reason that every so often it does produce meteor storms. Normally it's only a handful of meteors per hour on the best years, but sometimes, as in 36, 46 and 2011, it can give hundreds or even thousands of meteors. So it's moonless on the 8th when it reaches its peak, so it might be worth a look. And the radiant is near the head of the dragon, which is the constellation of Draco, and that's to the northwest, just above the Plough and Ursa Minor as well. So maybe worth looking at then. It might be the year that it's worth doing. No bright comets around, but this one probably is interesting for the reason that 67P Churyumov-Gerasimenko, it was visited by the Philae by Rosetta probe, which went into orbit in 2014, and the Philae lander was the first successful landing on a comet, so quite a significant event. It's pretty faint. It's currently 9.1, and it will peak at magnitude 8.3 on the 8th of November. But with a telescope, you should be able to, small telescope should be able to capture that, and it really is a target for images sometime after midnight. Recent images that I've seen are showing a tail. Its path takes it through Taurus and Gemini. So yeah, that's a good target for images, I would suggest. So maybe we'll see some of those on our Flickr group. It wouldn't be a talk about sky for me if I didn't mention globular clusters, because I love them. And the sky is peppered with them. Last month, probably slightly better, but they are moving to the west now, but they are all over the place. And despite what some of our members say, they are all totally different and very interesting. And here are 4 images from some of our members, including myself, which show how different they are. At first sight, they all look quite similar, but the structures of them, the colors of the stars, the density, and so on, they are all worth looking at. And I think they're really beautiful objects. They're quite easy to see some of the brighter ones telescopically with your eye, and imaging obviously brings out a lot more details. And you can see a lot more of our images in our Messier project. These are deep sky objects such as star clusters and nebulae and galaxies on our website as well. Okay, let's focus in a bit more on Pegasus itself. There's the square of Pegasus. If we take the top left corner, go along a couple of stars, and then go down a little bit, we get to the constellation of Triangulum and the great galaxy M33 in Triangulum, and that's a fantastic image that Nigel took. I think it's quite a difficult one. One of the main reasons is, even though it's quite a bright object at 6.3, because it's spread out over such a large area, it's actually surface brightness is equivalent to 23.6 magnitude. So it can easily get lost into the sky background. And certainly if you've got light pollution, it's very easy to lose it. But Nigel's brought that out really well. It's pretty large. You could fit a couple of full moons in it, apparently, on the sky. It's 2.7 million light years away, and it's part of our local group and probably the 3rd largest member. The Andromeda Galaxy and our Milky Way are larger, we believe. If we go back to Pegasus, and instead of turning left on those 2 stars, we turn right, then we get to the famous Andromeda Galaxy M31, with its satellite galaxies of M32 and M110, and that's a lovely image taken by Pat Devine from the centre of Edinburgh. So you can actually image galaxies from the centre of Edinburgh, and Pat showed that really well. M33 is big, but in angular dimensions on the sky, M31 is much bigger, over 3 degrees long and 1 degree high, and you could fit 12 full moons into its size on the sky. So it really is pretty large. It doesn't fit into the field of view of my telescope. I need to do a mosaic of about 6 panes to fit it in my telescope. Despite what it looks like, it is actually a barred spiral, but we can't actually see that very obviously from the angle here. It's 2.5 million light years away, and it used to be thought it was bigger than the Milky Way, but recent research says that the Milky Way may have a higher mass than the Andromeda Galaxy. And of course, don't make any long-term plans, because this is what's going to happen between the Milky Way and Andromeda within the next 4 or 5 billion years. That's a fantastic NASA simulation. And while we're in Pegasus, let's just pick out a very ordinary innocuous star, 51 Pegasi. Nothing very special. It's a main sequence star, similar to our own sun. But its claim to fame is it was the first definitive detection of an exoplanet orbiting a main sequence star. And that star is 51 Pegasi, which is a G-type star in 1995. And after that, we really sort of opened the floodgates to finding more exoplanets. It wasn't the first exoplanet detected. I think radio astronomers discovered something going around the pulsar. And there was another one detected in 1988 before that, but it was only really confirmed in 2003. So, but it is still very significant. And it was the discoverers of that actually won the Nobel Prize for Physics for it. And I think you'd call it a hot Jupiter. It orbits very close to its star and experiences really high temperatures. And as of the 1st of September, I think there are 4,834 exoplanets known. It's probably just the tip of the iceberg. If you look to the north now, the famous asterism of the Plough is pretty low down. It's not the month for looking at Ursa Major because it is below the pole star. The usual pointers at the edge of the Plough point us to the pole star there. But still lots of interest in the north. Cassiopeia is getting higher up. And here are some interesting objects from Cassiopeia, lots of open clusters and nebulae as well. That's the Bubble Nebula right next to M52 and M103, and quite fond of open clusters as well. Below it, chasing Cassiopeia off the sky, across the sky is Perseus. And between Cassiopeia and Perseus is the famous double cluster, which is a really lovely object. This is one of our ASE 24 objects. And if you don't know what that is, it's an observing list that we set up for beginners getting into astronomy. It's 24 of the most interesting and worthwhile sights in the sky. And I think going through those objects and trying to observe them yourself will give you a good start in astronomy. And that's the end of the presentation.